Hello students, this is Shivani Keshari, your English subject teacher. Today we will study a chapter from your English literature book and after that we will do the exercise also. So students, if you have any question regarding this chapter, then do drop it in the comment section. Now let's start the chapter through the animation video.
Chapter 5 At Home with Grandfather, Part 2,
I think we might have something to eat first.
said the grandfather.
What do you think?
Heidi, in the excitement of bed-making, had forgotten everything else. But now when she began to think about food, she felt terribly hungry. For she had had nothing to eat since the piece of bread and little cup of thin coffee that had been her breakfast early that morning before starting on her long, hot journey. So she answered without hesitation.
Yes, I think so too. Let us go down then, as we both think alike.
Said the old man, and he followed the child down the ladder. Then he went up to the hearth, pushed the big kettle aside, and drew forward the little one that was hanging on the chain, and seating himself on the round-topped, three-legged stool before the fire, blew it up into a clear, bright flame. The kettle soon began to boil, and meanwhile the old man held a large piece of cheese on a long iron fork over the fire, turning it round and round till it was toasted a nice golden yellow color on each side. Heidi watched all that was going on with eager curiosity. Suddenly some new idea seemed to come into her head, for she turned and ran to the cupboard, and then began going busily backwards and forwards. Presently, the grandfather got up and came to the table with the jug and the cheese, and there he saw it already tidily laid with the round loaf and 2 plates and 2 knives each in its right place. For Heidi had taken exact note that morning of all that there was in the cupboard, and she knew which things would be wanted for their meal.
Ah, that's right.
Said the grandfather.
I'm glad to see that you have some ideas of your own.
And as he spoke, he laid the toasted cheese on a layer of bread.
But there is still something missing.
Heidi looked at the jug that was steaming away invitingly and ran quickly back to the cupboard. At first, she could only see a small bowl left on the shelf, but she was not long in perplexity. For a moment later, she caught sight of 2 glasses further back, and without an instant's loss of time, she returned with these and the bowl and put them down on the table.
Good. I see you know how to set about things. But what will you do for a seat?
The grandfather himself was sitting on the only chair in the room. Heidi flew to the hearth and, dragging the 3-legged stool up to the table, sat herself down upon it.
Well, you have managed to find a seat for yourself. I see. Only rather a low one, I'm afraid.
Said the grandfather.
But you would not be tall enough to reach the table, even if you sat in my chair. The first thing now, however, is to have something to eat. So come along.
With that, he stood up, filled the bowl with milk, and placing it on the chair, pushed it in front of Heidi on her little 3-legged stool, so that she now had a table to herself. Then he brought her a large slice of bread and a piece of the golden cheese, and told her to eat, after which he went and sat down on the corner of the table and began his own meal. Heidi lifted the bowl with both hands and drank without pause till it was empty, for the thirst of all her long hot journey had returned upon her. Then she drew a deep breath. In the eagerness of her thirst, she had not stopped to breathe, and put down the bowl.
Was the milk nice?
Asked her grandfather. I never drank any so good before, answered Heidi. Then you must have some more. And the old man filled her bowl again to the brim and set it before the child, who was now hungrily beginning her bread, having first spread it with the cheese, which after being toasted was soft as butter. The two together tasted deliciously, and the child looked the picture of contentment as she sat eating and at intervals taking further draughts of milk. The meal being over, the grandfather went outside to put the goat shed in order, and Heidi watched with interest while he first swept it out and then put fresh straw for the goats to sleep upon. Then he went to the little well shed, and there he cut some long round sticks and a small round board. In this he bored some holes and stuck the sticks into them, and there, as if made by magic, was a three-legged stool just like her grandfather's, only higher. Heidi stood and looked at it, speechless with astonishment.
What do you think that is?
Asked her grandfather.
It's my stool, I know, because it is such a high one. And it was made all of a minute,
Said the child, still lost in wonder and admiration.
She understands what she sees. Her eyes are in the right place.
Remarked the grandfather to himself as he continued his way round the hut, knocking in a nail here and there, or making fast some part of the door. And so with hammer and nails and pieces of wood, going from spot to spot, mending or clearing away wherever work of the kind was needed. Heidi followed him step by step, her eyes attentively taking in all that he did, and everything that she saw was a fresh source of pleasure to her. And so the time passed happily on till evening. Then the wind began to roar louder than ever through the old fir trees. Heidi listened with delight to the sound, and it filled her heart so full of gladness that she skipped and danced round the old trees, as if some unheard of joy had come to her. The grandfather stood and watched her from the shed. Suddenly, a shrill whistle was heard. Heidi paused in her dancing, and the grandfather came out. Down from the heights above the goats came springing, one after another, with Peter in their midst. As they neared the hut, the goats stood still, and then two of their number, two beautiful slender animals, one white and one brown, ran forward to where the grandfather was standing, and began licking his hands, for he was holding a little salt which he always had ready for his goats on their return home. Peter disappeared with the remainder of his flock. Heidi tenderly stroked the two goats in turn, running first to one side of them, and then the other, and jumping about in her glee at the pretty little animals.
Are they ours, grandfather? Are they both ours? Are you going to put them in the shed? Will they always stay with us?
Heidi's questions came tumbling out one after the other, so that her grandfather had only time to answer each of them with, "Yes, yes." When the goats had finished licking up the salt, her grandfather told her to go and fetch her bowl and the bread. Heidi obeyed and was soon back again. The grandfather milked the white goat and filled her basin, and then breaking off a piece of bread,
Now eat your supper,
he said.
and then go up to bed.
Cousin Date left another little bundle for you with a nightgown and other small things in it, which you will find at the bottom of the cupboard if you want them. I must go and shut up the goats, so be off and sleep well.
Good night, grandfather. Good night. What are their names, grandfather? What are their names?
She called out as she ran after his retreating figure and the goats.
The white one is named Little Swan, and the brown one, Little Bear.
He answered.
Good night, Little Swan. Good night, Little Bear.
She called again at the top of her voice, for they were already inside the shed. Then she sat down on the seat and began to eat and drink. But the wind was so strong that it almost blew her away, so she made haste and finished her supper, and then went indoors and climbed up to her bed, where she was soon lying as sweetly and soundly asleep as any young princess on.
Students, this is an exercise of this chapter. If you want, you can pause the video and do it. Thank you, students.